In this episode, we take the idea of AI risk governance and turn it into something you can actually start, because many programs fail before they begin simply because the first steps feel too big. When people imagine governance, they often picture committees, thick policies, and long timelines, and that image makes new learners think you have to wait until everything is perfect. The first 90 days are not about perfection, and they are not about boiling the ocean. They are about creating enough structure that the organization can see what artificial intelligence, AI, is being used for, who is responsible, and what the basic boundaries are, so risk stops being invisible. The goal is a plan that is realistic, repeatable, and durable under pressure, meaning it still works when the organization is busy and tempted to take shortcuts. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A first 90-day plan starts with a mindset that governance must be usable, not just admirable. If you create rules that slow work dramatically or require expert knowledge to follow, teams will route around them, and shadow usage will grow. If you create rules that are too vague, teams will interpret them differently, and you get inconsistent safety, which is another kind of failure. The sweet spot is practical guardrails that reduce the biggest harms while still letting people do useful work. In the early stage, you are not trying to measure everything or prevent every possible mistake. You are trying to establish visibility, accountability, and a minimum set of controls that match your highest risk exposure. That focus is what makes governance stick, because people can understand it, leaders can support it, and the program can grow from it without collapsing under its own weight. The first week in a 90-day plan is often about discovery, because you cannot govern what you cannot see. Discovery is not an audit that tries to punish people, and it is not a hunt for every minor experiment. It is a focused effort to map the most important AI uses and the most sensitive areas where harm could occur. You want to learn where generative tools are being used for drafting or summarizing, where models are influencing decisions, and where data might be flowing into external services. You also want to understand what the business is trying to achieve, because governance that ignores business goals becomes a permanent obstacle and loses support. This early discovery work should produce a simple picture of what exists, what is planned, and what feels most urgent. The result is not a perfect inventory, but a credible starting map that is good enough to guide the next steps. As discovery progresses, the plan should quickly establish ownership, because unclear ownership is the fastest path to confusion during incidents. Ownership has two sides: a business owner who cares about purpose and outcomes, and a risk owner who cares about safety, controls, and ongoing oversight. Some organizations also assign a technical owner who can coordinate changes and monitoring, but the exact structure can vary. The point is that someone must be accountable for each meaningful AI system or use case, including those supplied by vendors. When you assign ownership early, you create a clear path for escalation, decision-making, and follow-through. You also reduce the common failure where everyone assumes someone else is responsible, especially when a system spans multiple teams. Strong ownership is one of the simplest ways to make governance feel real, because it creates a human anchor for accountability. With ownership in place, the next foundation is a basic intake process, because new AI ideas appear constantly once people see the value. Intake is the front door where teams describe what they want to do and where the organization decides what oversight is needed. In the first 90 days, intake should be lightweight, because if it is too heavy, people will avoid it. A good intake captures the purpose, the users, the data types involved, and whether outputs could affect people in high-stakes ways. It also asks about vendor involvement and whether the system will be customer-facing. You are not trying to demand a large technical dossier. You are trying to spot risk signals early and route the request to the right level of review. Intake becomes the main tool for preventing governance from being reactive, because it shifts risk thinking to the start instead of after something goes wrong. Once intake exists, you need a simple risk tiering approach, because not all AI uses deserve the same level of friction. Risk tiering is the process of sorting use cases into levels based on impact, likelihood, and time sensitivity, with special attention to irreversible harms like privacy exposure, discrimination, safety outcomes, and legal commitments. A low-risk tier might include internal brainstorming with non-sensitive topics, while a higher-risk tier might include customer communication, use of sensitive personal data, or decisioning that affects access to opportunities. Tiering is important because it makes governance proportional, and proportional governance is what people will tolerate long-term. It also helps leaders understand why one project can move quickly while another must slow down for review. If you skip tiering, you often end up with either blanket bans that push you underground or permissive rules that leave high-stakes areas underprotected. In early program stages, tiering does not need to be perfect, but it must be consistent enough to guide decisions. At the same time, the plan should create a minimum viable policy that is short, clear, and focused on behaviors that create the most harm. A minimum policy should define what tools are approved, what categories of data are prohibited as inputs, and what categories of use require special review. It should also address how outputs can and cannot be used, especially around decisioning, customer promises, and claims that could be interpreted as legal commitments. The policy should be written in plain language, because people do not follow policies they cannot understand quickly. It should also explain why the rules exist, because rules feel arbitrary without an explanation of the harm being prevented. Most importantly, the policy must be paired with safe alternatives, because prohibitions without alternatives create shadow behavior. In the first 90 days, the policy goal is not completeness. It is reducing the biggest predictable failures while keeping work moving. Safe alternatives deserve their own place in the plan because they determine whether governance is lived or ignored. If you tell people not to paste sensitive data into an external tool, you must give them a way to accomplish the same task safely. That might be an approved internal assistant, a protected workflow for drafting, or a simple guidance path that explains how to sanitize inputs while still being productive. Alternatives must be easy to access, easy to understand, and good enough to satisfy real needs, because people choose convenience under pressure. If the safe option feels worse than the unsafe one, shadow use will return no matter how strong the policy sounds. A strong 90-day plan treats alternatives as a product to be delivered, not as a suggestion to be announced. When you get this right early, you build trust between governance and the business, and trust is what keeps programs from collapsing later. As you move into the middle of the 90 days, the plan should add a control library starter set, because repeatability is how governance scales. A starter control library is a small set of reusable safeguards that can be applied across many use cases, especially in common patterns like generative drafting, summarization, decision support, and vendor model usage. Controls should be expressed as outcomes that must be true, such as having defined ownership, having monitoring, having a review step for high-stakes outputs, and restricting sensitive data exposure. The library does not need to be large, and in fact, a large library often becomes unusable. The goal is to capture the highest leverage controls that address the most common risks, including leakage, harmful outputs, over-reliance by humans, and unclear accountability. Over time, the library grows as the organization learns, but in the first 90 days it should stay focused and practical. This is one of the best ways to avoid reinventing safety for every project. Monitoring and measurement also need an early foothold, but the plan should be careful to avoid building a dashboard that looks impressive while telling you nothing useful. Early metrics should focus on visibility and control effectiveness, because those are the quickest signals of whether governance is working. Visibility metrics include how many use cases are known, how many go through intake, and where high-risk uses exist. Control effectiveness metrics include whether required reviews occur, whether sensitive data handling rules are being followed, and whether incidents or near misses are being reported. You may also track a small number of key risk indicator (KRI) style signals, such as spikes in flagged harmful outputs, repeated attempts to input prohibited data, or increased customer complaints linked to AI interactions. The purpose of early metrics is to trigger decisions and adjustments, not to produce a monthly report card. When measurement is tied to action, the organization learns faster and reduces risk more effectively. Incident readiness must be part of the 90-day plan because even a small program will face surprises, and unprepared organizations lose critical time during the first hours of an event. Readiness does not require a massive response organization on day one, but it does require a clear pathway for reporting concerns, a clear incident lead role, and a clear process for containment decisions. A minimal playbook can define what qualifies as an AI incident, what information should be captured immediately, and who is authorized to pause a feature or restrict access when harm is plausible. It should also define how communications will be handled so messages are consistent and truthful, especially if an incident becomes public. Incident readiness is also a trust signal internally, because teams feel safer raising concerns when they know the organization will respond calmly and constructively. In the early phase, it is better to have a simple, usable response path than an elaborate one that nobody remembers. Training and communication are the glue that makes early governance stick, and the plan should treat them as essential, not optional. Training in the first 90 days should focus on practical decisions people make every day, like what data is safe to input, when outputs need verification, and what to do when a tool produces something harmful or suspicious. Communication should also make approved tools and safe alternatives easy to find, because people cannot follow guidance they cannot locate quickly. A common beginner mistake is to write a policy and assume behavior will change, but behavior changes when people understand the why and see a clear how. Training should avoid technical depth that overwhelms new users and should instead emphasize risk patterns and safe habits. It should also reinforce that reporting near misses is valued, because early reporting prevents larger harm. When training and communication are consistent, governance becomes part of normal work rather than an occasional compliance event. Vendor and third-party integration should be included in the plan because many organizations adopt AI through external services, and vendor usage can quietly expand without oversight. The 90-day plan should establish a basic due diligence routine that asks what data is used, what data is retained, what rights exist around inputs and outputs, and what incident support is provided. It should also establish contract expectations for high-risk vendors, such as clear responsibilities during incidents and clear constraints on using customer data for model improvement. You do not need to negotiate perfect contracts in 90 days, but you do need a standard set of questions and a repeatable process, because repeatability reduces blind spots. Vendor integration also includes operational readiness, meaning you know how to contact the vendor during an incident and what support timelines to expect. This is part of making governance stick, because surprises often come from relationships that were never formally governed. As the plan approaches the final stretch, it should include a review and adjustment cycle, because the first version of governance is always imperfect. A 90-day plan is successful when it creates a feedback loop where the program can improve based on real usage patterns, near misses, and friction points. If intake is too slow, the plan should adjust it so compliance becomes easier. If policy language is confusing, the plan should simplify it and add examples that match real workflows. If safe alternatives are not being used, the plan should investigate why and improve usability, not simply repeat the prohibition. If monitoring produces too much noise, the plan should refine signals so teams do not start ignoring alerts. This review cycle should be visible to the business, because responsiveness builds trust and encourages participation. Governance sticks when people believe it is fair, practical, and willing to learn. The final piece of a strong first 90 days is to clearly define what success looks like, because success gives leaders a reason to keep supporting the program. Success in this stage is not the absence of incidents, because incidents can happen even in mature programs. Success is increased visibility into AI use, consistent intake and tiering for new use cases, clear ownership for meaningful systems, a minimum viable policy that people can follow, and safe alternatives that reduce shadow usage. Success also includes having basic incident readiness and a small set of meaningful metrics that drive action. When leaders can see these outcomes, governance feels like an enabler of safe progress rather than a bureaucratic burden. It also creates a foundation for the next 90 days, where the program can deepen controls, expand monitoring, and refine governance based on experience. A strong start makes the long run easier, because it prevents chaos from becoming the default. As we close, The big idea is that launching AI risk governance that sticks is about building a usable system of visibility, accountability, and proportional controls in the first 90 days. You begin by discovering what is happening and assigning ownership so decisions have a clear home. You create a lightweight intake process and consistent risk tiering so oversight matches stakes without suffocating low-risk work. You publish a minimum viable policy that is clear about sensitive data and high-risk uses, and you pair it with safe alternatives so people can stay productive without going underground. You establish a starter control library, early metrics tied to action, and basic incident readiness so the program can respond when surprises occur. You reinforce everything with training, communication, and a review loop that improves the program based on real behavior. When these pieces are in place, governance stops being an idea and becomes a habit, which is exactly what makes it last.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.